Charles promised his grandchildren a reunion, then he accepted conditions. Before we test that promise, we need to stand in the room where it was made. Highgrove House, early July. Long Gloucestershire, light falling through leaded windows onto oak paneling darkened by centuries of polish. The drawing room smelled of warm dust and dried lavender. Mustiness rose from curtains that have hung in the same position since before anyone alive can remember. Charles sat in the leather chair near the fireplace, the one that creaks when weight shifts forward. His fingers pressed together the way they do when he is organizing an argument he does not want to have. His jaw tightened. His shoulders rose and settled, the way a body prepares for something it has accepted but not made peace with. On the mantelpiece, a carriage clock ticked with the steady indifference of an object that does not know what it is about to measure. That clock would govern what came next. He had agreed to the terms already. No drama, no cameras, no recording devices, one witness present throughout, and 1 hour, 60 minutes, to reach across 4 years of silence and find 2 children who had grown up without him. The promise was reunion. The receipt was something closer to an appointment. To understand why those conditions existed, you have to feel the weight of what preceded them. 4 years had passed since Charles last held these children. Archie had been 3 years old. Lilibet had been 1. In the space between then and now, entire childhoods had unfolded without him. Archie had learned to read. He had started school. He had grown tall enough to reach door handles by himself and pour his own cereal. Lilibet had spoken her first full sentence. She had ridden a bicycle. She had developed preferences, fears, delights, an entire interior life her grandfather had never witnessed. 4 years of bedtime stories Charles never read. 4 years of skinned knees he never kissed. 4 years of birthday candles flickering out on video calls that never quite connected. First words he never heard in person. First steps he never steadied with his own hands. First days of school he never drove them to. All of it happening 3 time zones and an ocean away from a man who could not close the distance. He had photographs. Photographs are not the same. He had video calls where faces froze mid-sentence and voices arrived half a second late. Video calls are not the same either. Nothing is the same as being in the room. Because those years had been shaped by bitterness and public fracture, the institution surrounding Charles grew cautious. Not cruel, necessarily, cautious. The palace had watched every encounter between this family become ammunition for the next news cycle. Every handshake analyzed, every glance interpreted, every word within earshot transcribed and sold. Therefore, the people protecting the monarchy's stability did what institutions always do when human need meets institutional risk. They built a framework. They wrote conditions. They set a clock. The framework arrived before the children did. It sat on Charles's desk like a contract, because in every way that mattered, it was one. Cream paper, typed, precise. The visit would last 60 minutes. Camilla would be present, not as grandmother, but as witness. That role carries a different temperature entirely. No photographs would be taken. No visual evidence. This meeting occurred the way either side might later describe it, and beneath every clause, one phrase anchored the architecture. No drama. 2 words that sound reasonable until you realize who they were asking to comply. A 7-year-old and a 5-year-old asked to perform emotional restraint most adults cannot manage. Charles had been warned in language that was diplomatic but unmistakable. This could be the end of things if conditions were not met. The institution was offering 1 hour. 1 hour was not a gift. It was a test. And Charles, sitting in his drawing room with the terms on his desk, accepted. His hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. He pressed his palms flat against the wood to steady them. A grandfather shouldn't have to audition for time with his own grandchildren. But this grandfather was also a king, and kings do not get to separate those roles, even when separation is the cruelest thing the crown demands. But here is where fairness requires us to pause and hear the defense. The institution's caution was not born from paranoia. It was learned from pain. Every previous attempt at family diplomacy had been followed by public distortion of what actually happened. Private conversations surfaced in interviews watched by millions. Gentle gestures became tabloid headlines that burned for weeks. Confidential discussions appeared repackaged in ways that made trust impossible and vulnerability dangerous. The people advising Charles concluded the only safe reunion was a managed one. Their argument was not unreasonable. Protect the moment by containing it. Limit the time so less can go wrong. Place a witness in the room so no one can later mischaracterize what occurred. These conditions were not hostile, they were defensive. They represented the best available option in a landscape where every option carried risk. That defense nearly holds. It nearly holds until you put a child in the room. Archie arrived first, 7 years old, taller than anyone expected. His trainers squeaked on the hallway tiles. His eyes moved the way children's eyes move in unfamiliar grand houses. He tracked the height of ceilings. He measured the weight of curtains. He registered the formality of rooms built for ceremony rather than comfort. He held his body close, arms near his sides, navigating with a caution that children carry when told to be careful about something unnamed. Lilibet followed, 5 years old, holding someone's jacket sleeve with one hand, the other clutching a stuffed animal whose ear had been loved into softness. Her new shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. She looked up at the paintings on the walls the way very young children look at anything enormous. Her whole head tilted back. Her mouth fell slightly open. The air in the drawing room shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. Furniture polish and old books, and then suddenly children's shampoo and the sweetness that clings to small coats worn outdoors. The temperature changed. The silence changed. Spaces that have held only adults for years register the arrival of children the way a pond registers a stone. Charles stood from his chair. His knees protested, the way they do now, the way they will increasingly do. He had cancer. That fact sat in the room like an uninvited guest no one would acknowledge. A grandfather whose diagnosis makes every hour heavier had been given 60 of them. Not 60 hours, not 60 days, 60 minutes. His throat tightened. His hands opened at his sides, palms forward. The universal gesture of a person trying not to frighten someone into retreating. His eyes were already shining before either child had spoken a word. The first minutes were awkward. They were always going to be awkward. Archie did not remember this house. He had been 3 the last time these walls surrounded him. 3-year-old memories dissolved like sugar in rain. Lilibet had never formed memories here at all. She was meeting a room, a house, a grandfather, for essentially the first time in her conscious life. Charles lowered himself to their level. His knees found the carpet. Thick Gloucestershire wool pressed patterns into his trousers that would still be visible an hour later. The carpet smelled faintly of the dog that usually slept there. He spoke softly, his voice carrying the slight hoarseness that treatment had left behind. He asked about favorite colors, about school, about whether the journey had been long, about a stuffed animal's name. Each question careful, each answer received like something precious. But the conditions were already working. Their weight was invisible but absolute. Camilla sat nearby, in a straight-backed chair, her posture correct. She smiled. She was warm. But she was there in a capacity that everyone understood. That understanding colored every exchange like dye dropped into clear water. Charles could feel the framework holding. Warmth itself was being rationed. Spontaneity was precisely what the conditions had been designed to prevent. Therefore, what happened next matters more than anything else in this story. Somewhere around the halfway mark, something unscripted occurred. Archie laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a performing for adults laugh. A real one, sudden and bright. The kind of laugh that comes from the belly and fills a room before anyone can decide whether to allow it. The sound hit the oak paneling and bounced back. For a moment, the drawing room at Highgrove became a living room where a grandfather was making his grandson laugh. Charles's face transformed. The careful diplomatic expression dissolved into something raw and recognizable and entirely human. Lilibet's hand found Charles's sleeve, small fingers gripping fabric, pulling herself closer on the sofa. The cushion dented beneath her weight. Charles's arm came around her with the careful slowness of a man who knows this might be taken away at any moment. His hand rested on her hair. Archie leaned against his other side. The three of them sat together on a sofa in a grand English drawing room, and for half a minute, no condition mattered. For 30 seconds, maybe 40, the framework evaporated. There was no witness. There was no managed appointment. There was no institutional concession. There was a grandfather and two children discovering that biology does not require permission from institutions. Charles's eyes glistened. His breathing changed, deeper and less controlled. The muscles around his mouth softened. People who know him well would recognize the expression. It is the closest he comes to unguarded joy. But then someone checked the time. The gesture was small, a glance toward the mantelpiece, a subtle shift in posture signaling awareness of the shrinking window. The clock had been doing its work all along, converting family time into institutional intervals, and now its count was becoming urgent. The framework descended again like glass walls lowering around a museum exhibit. The visit was not a visit. It was an appointment. Appointments have endings that arrive whether anyone wants them to or not. The remaining minutes carried a different weight, heavier, more desperate. Charles's questions grew more specific. What do you like to eat for breakfast? Do you have friends at school? Can you count to 100? What makes you laugh? What are you afraid of? Each question was an act of archaeology, a grandfather excavating the childhood he had missed. His voice grew thicker as the minutes narrowed. Lilibet showed him her stuffed animal. She held it up so he could see its face. She explained its name with the grave seriousness that 5-year-olds bring to matters of supreme importance. She told him its favorite food. She told him it was scared of thunder. Archie described a book about dragons. Charles listened with his whole body tilted forward, hands on his knees. He was absorbing details he would replay alone for weeks in this same room. The hour nearly ended without breaking through. The conditions had almost succeeded completely. One managed hour, no drama, no cameras, no evidence, except memory. Memory in small children fades faster than anyone wants to admit. The institution's framework was completing its task with the quiet efficiency of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. Caution had won. Management had held. The reunion was contained. Then Lilibet asked when they could come back. 5 words from a 5-year-old. Every condition in that room became visible for what it was. Not protection, not defense, not even caution. A cage built from good intentions and locked with logic that collapsed at a child's question. Charles's composure broke, not dramatically, not with the display the conditions had been designed to prevent. His chin dropped toward his chest. His hand covered hers on the sofa cushion. His breath caught a small, involuntary sound. Anyone who has loved a child would recognize it. The sound of a heart asked to hold more than it safely can. He did not answer her question. He could not. The honest answer was that he did not know. The conditions governed this visit. The next visit, if there was a next visit, would require its own negotiation, its own terms, its own managed framework, its own clock. Reconciliation measured out in supervised installments, like a debt being paid in coins too small to ever clear the balance. And here is where the late reveal changes everything you have heard. Charles was not the first in his family to face this arithmetic. His mother, Elizabeth, met Lilibet exactly once before she died. Once. A single meeting between a great-grandmother and the child who carried her name. That meeting, too, had been brief. That meeting, too, had been managed. That meeting, too, had been compressed by circumstance. And then, Elizabeth was gone. The meeting that was supposed to be the first became the only. The pattern was already written. Too short, too managed, too late. Charles was standing inside a pattern his mother had already completed to its end. Someone indicated it was time to leave. The words were gentle. The meaning was absolute. 60 minutes had elapsed. The institution's framework had completed its function. Children were gathered from the sofa. Small coats retrieved from chair arms. The stuffed animal nearly forgotten on the cushion. Small hands grabbed it back with the urgency of a child reclaiming something essential. The drawing room emptied of noise and warmth, and the particular chaos children bring to any space they occupy. In the growing silence, the room reasserted its original character. Grand, formal, designed for governance, not for grandchildren. Charles walked them to the door. His stride was careful, the way it has become since the diagnosis. Each step carried the deliberation of a man conserving energy he no longer takes for granted. Gravel crunched under small shoes. Car doors opened with a mechanical click. Seat belts were fastened. Lilibet waved through glass. Her hand opened and closed the way very young children wave, fingers working independently. A gesture that looks less like goodbye and more like grasping at air. Archie raised one hand, brief and already forward-looking. The car pulled away. Gravel popped beneath tires. The sound diminished down the drive, past the stone pillars, through the gate. The engine note faded into hedgerow and distance. Then Highgrove was silent again. The particular silence of large country houses, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. Charles stood in the doorway and listened to the silence fill the space where laughter had been. Inside, the drawing room held its evidence. The cushions still carried the impression of a small body. The air still held traces of children's shampoo, already fading back into leather and polish. On the carpet near the fireplace, faint impressions remained where Charles's knees had pressed into the wool. A water glass on the side table still held the ghost of small fingerprints. The stuffed animal's absent weight still dented the spot where Lilibet had set it down while showing its face. Evidence everywhere. Evidence of nothing the institution had forbidden, and everything it had rationed. A king said he wanted reunion. He delivered one conditional hour. The institution gained its managed outcome. Risk contained. Narrative controlled. Framework completed. But the price was a grandfather's face at a window. A car carrying two children into the distance from which they had, briefly, conditionally, incompletely emerged. The verdict here is not about character. It is not about who was right in the longer war this family has been fighting. The verdict is narrower and therefore harder to avoid. Charles promised reunion. He delivered 60 supervised minutes. The question is not whether he kept the promise. The question is whether the promise was ever his to keep. Elizabeth met Lilibet once. Once was all she got. Charles has met these children now, briefly, conditionally, inside a framework designed to protect everything except the relationship itself. And on the mantelpiece at Highgrove, the clock does not distinguish between minutes spent in reunion and minutes spent apart. It measures all of them equally. It does not know that some minutes are worth more. It does not know that a grandfather with a diagnosis is spending currency he cannot earn back. It simply ticks, indifferent and precise, keeping perfect time over everything being lost between its intervals. Was this the beginning or was this all there is? Charles in the Highgrove doorway, door still open, conditions already forgotten, the drive empty, light fading over Gloucestershire fields, and behind him on the mantelpiece, the clock still ticking toward whatever comes